So many thanks for joining us on Bloomberg Quint. The economic survey points out an interesting analysis that you guys have done. It says that growing Indian companies do not create as many jobs as their peers in US. Say, for example, a 40-year-old company in India would not create as many jobs as a 40-year-old US company. So my first part of the question is, what do you think is the reason for this? And secondly, do you think incentives given to such companies should be linked to the number of jobs that these companies create? Because this is also a suggestion given by the industry to the finance minister.
I think we have a somewhat different view on this. Basically, the issue here is that we have a system where while we recognize that the MSME sector is very important, and it is very important, we have tended to think of them in very static terms. And consequently, the incentive structure, and that's what the point that the chief economic advisor was just making, is that we then incentivize them to essentially remain dwarfs, whereas in fact we should think of them as infants who can grow fast and over time generate jobs, value creation, and so on. So this is an important mindset change. The current incentive structure tries to in fact restrain them from becoming anything other than grow past their initial MSME status. So we think, therefore, of MSMEs as a incubator for high growth, large companies of the future, rather than dwarfs who never grow. So that is basically the point, and he gave a whole bunch of reasons which are there in the chapter that you can quite go through the details. But clearly, size-based incentives, which actually discourage going past those thresholds, is, in our view at least, not conducive to creating, thinking of the MSMEs as sort of a creche for infants that can grow into giants.
Okay. So the Eco Survey also says that the new welfare schemes that the government comes out with need to be funded without hurting the fiscal. And as we are aware, the government has recently expanded the PM Kisan scheme, which has also increased its outlay. So how do you think these important schemes can be managed without hurting the fiscal at the same time?
So I think this is an issue that is there. There are several things. I mean, it's a long debate. But clearly, 2 or 3 things are important. One is that we use technology, particularly we already have the JAM Trinity, for example, DBT and so on, to reduce wastage. And of course, there is a significant section there talking about behavioral economics and creating new behavioral incentives in order to deal with, we have seen the application of behavioral dynamics for things like the Swachh Bharat scheme, for example. And so similar sort of efforts will be made in the future.
Okay, and my last question to you, sir. The Eco Survey also says that the GDP is slowing, and the collections from GDP, from GST, the goods and services tax, have been dismal. So this is going to have an impact on the fiscal, and the current financial year also poses several challenges on the fiscal front. So how do you think these challenges can be managed?
So I think we are aware that in the last quarter or two, the GDP has slowed down, and that shows through in the numbers that we have available, and we have highlighted that in the economic survey as well. But what the main thrust of the survey is then, how do we revive the economy? And I think one of the points about the survey is that we highlighted a very investment-driven economic model. This is not a generic economic model, it's a very specific economic model, and we made our case using data from international data, particularly experience from East Asia like China, Korea, Taiwan, Japan in its heydays, and so on. And we said that, look, there is a specific growth model that generates very high growth rates over periods of time. And that growth model essentially requires your investment rate to be above 35% of GDP. Now, there are many ways of supporting such a high investment rate, and we talk about them in the survey, but there are a few that are clearly important. One is, of course, you have to lower the cost of capital. And the structure and cost of capital in the country is very high, and we clearly need to reduce that. And we've also talked about the importance of the ability to enforce contracts, and therefore, consequently, the importance of legal reforms. And we have gone into the details. And again, we have shown that the amount of effort and investment that we need to put in order to not just reach 100% case clearance rate, but to in fact get rid of the entire 35 million backlog in the next 5 years. It's large, but it's not so large and unsurmountable that we can't do it. So usually people think of the legal wrangle as a legal problem as something that is completely unsurmountable and so on. We show clearly through numbers it's a large problem, but a solvable problem.